Hello, this is David Bolton again in part 4 of Deconstructing and Reconstructing Astrology with Omnicycles software. So in part 3, we looked at several great circles: the equator, the meridian that goes to a place of birth, north and south, the prime vertical that goes to a place of birth, west to east. Then we added another great circle, one that divides the Earth into two halves, the horizon, each point of which is exactly 90 degrees from its pole, which in this case is the place of birth. Today, we're going to add the fifth great circle that's very important in astrology, one of the most important, maybe the most important, and that is the ecliptic. Let me add it here. There you have the pink line. I'm going to add the degrees to it as well. Well, you'll see them a little later. There you go. Now, what is the ecliptic? Well, it's another great circle. It's the projection onto the sphere of the Earth of the path of the sun and the planets around the Earth, the apparent path. Obviously, the planets, including the Earth, are going around the sun. But from the Earth's point of view, it looks like the other planets are going around us, right? Until Copernicus came along and and taught us that that wasn't the case. So here's the ecliptic at the time of my birth. I was born at 9:48 a.m. in Baltimore, Maryland, on November 8th. That is all reflected here somehow in what we can see, though it's not so obvious. If we zoom in here, we'll see the signs. 0 Libra is the point of intersection between the ecliptic and the equator. Now, the ecliptic is what we see when we do a natal chart. Here I'm going to put into the screen. Excuse me. There we go. Here's the Omnicycles program with my natal chart. Anybody who does astrology is used to seeing this type of chart. This is the ecliptic, the zodiac with the signs Aries, Taurus, etc. There's my sun in Scorpio. These are all ecliptic positions, right? So here is the ecliptic. If I were to project the planets onto there, we're not going to do that in this chapter, but we'll see that the planets are going to lie more or less along the ecliptic line. So the lowest point on this great circle, you see this one isn't, well, it's not like the equator that goes this way. It seems to be a little unusual, and that it's crooked, right? Well, the ecliptic has a low point and a high point. The low point is always going to be 0 degrees Capricorn, which is, let's see, over here. And that's going to have a latitude of a little more than 23 degrees south. You see it's pretty low, right? The opposite of 0 Capricorn, 0 Cancer, is going to be the high point of the ecliptic. Any planet that is in 0 degrees Cancer is going to be at its very highest. That is in the northern hemisphere. That's about 23 degrees north, right? As we can see here at the bottom, if I move the cursor there, 23.4 degrees north. So with the ecliptic, we've added the fifth great circle that's important in astrology. I want to point out here a couple more intersections. We saw one intersection in the last chapter, the intersection of the prime vertical, here in green, and the meridian, 2 lines that go through my place of birth. In your case, it would be your place of birth. This cross here would be located some other place in the world if you didn't happen to be born in Baltimore, Maryland. And there are other intersections as well, the meridian and the equator, the meridian and the ecliptic. Does this ring a bell for any of you? The meridian and the ecliptic, that intersection is what we call the midheaven in astrology, medium Coeli, right? MC. Once again, let's get the Omnicycles chart up there. Here we have it. In my chart, it's in the sign Libra, 13 degrees Libra. Yes? This is the ecliptic, right? This represents the meridian. This is the intersection. Now, some people think that this, well, if this circle were the Earth, then I was born under this point. That's not really true. We're going to see that in the future chapter. When you use Google Earth to study your chart, you're going to become very creative because you're going to see that a lot of things you've learned in astrology or that have been suggested to you really aren't that way. Let's distinguish here two things. The midheaven, which is always going to be the intersection of this meridian and the ecliptic. It will be at this point. That is 13 degrees Libra. Here we had the beginning of Libra, right? Well, if we move along here, if we had degrees in there, we'd see this is 13 degrees. This longitude line runs through 13 degrees Libra. That is, it'll be at 12 on the equator, but because this line is longer, that's the hypotenuse of this triangle, if you so will. My midheaven is 13 degrees Libra. This intersection is the midheaven. But that only in part represents my place of birth. Yes, it is at the longitude of my place of birth, but my place of birth was way up here in the north. And this point, this intersection, we call the zenith of the place, Zenith. That's the zenith. That's the point in the heavens that is exactly above one's place of birth. The zenith, of course, obviously should be very, very, very important in astrology, but it's unfortunately almost never used. Instead, we use a zenith substitute, that is this zenith point projected southwards, due south, until we get to the ecliptic. Why? Well, because all the planets move more or less along the ecliptic, and we want to use that, the significance of the zenith, so we project that, as they say, downwards until we get to the ecliptic. And we call this intersection, once again, the MC, Midheaven Coeli, or the midheaven, right? Other intersections include, as I said, the equator and the ecliptic. That's 0 degrees Libra, or if we go 180 degrees around the other side of the Earth, it'll be 0 degrees Aries, right, where it goes back up in this direction. Here's another intersection. That is, we had the ecliptic and this orange line, the meridian, on the other side of the Earth, right? That was the midheaven. This is the lower heaven. If we look at the chart again, that's the point represented by the opposite side here. In other words, 13 degrees Aries in my case, which will be my lower heaven, Imum Coeli in Latin. Some people still use those Latin terms, IC, the cusp of the fourth house, as people commonly use it, right? That'll be on the other side of the Earth. It'll be this intersection, right? Now, other intersections, we had this one in part 3, prime vertical, horizon and the equator. That's the true east point. Not talking now about that projected east point. That will be that projected down on the ecliptic. I personally don't think that projection is so important. In future chapters, we're going to get into the subject of projecting something onto another plane. In this case, we saw the zenith projected downwards onto the ecliptic, so we have a common reference plane to compare it to the planets. Your planets, or my planets in this case, were along this line, the ecliptic line. And so we project the zenith downwards, due south, till we get the ecliptic, and then we have the midheaven, and then we calculate angles of the midheaven. I don't think that's the best way to do it, as we'll see in future chapters. But that's the way it's almost always done in astrology. We'll have other intersections that we're going to deal with in future chapters, go into this a little more deeply, and then we're going to see also, perhaps in the next chapter, my planets projected onto the Earth as well. So, 5 great circles. The equator in yellow, the meridian in orange here, the prime vertical, yeah. These two in the crosshairs, we have the place of birth. Then we have the horizon. Remember that also cuts the Earth in two. Every point in the horizon is 90 degrees from the place of birth. That's a very important point, as we're going to see a little later in future chapters. And today we added the ecliptic. It goes this way. If you're born at a different time of day, it will look different. You won't have exactly these countries beneath the ecliptic at this angle. We're going to get into all of this later, but for now it's important to remember that in astrology we use mainly 5 great circles, and here we are. We've completed our short introduction to all 5. So if you don't have it already, download the Google Earth Pro program that is free. You can find it, just Google it. In addition, you can get Omnicycles software for free, the version that does Google Earth. Once again, there it is, and we'll have instructions there on how you can prepare files that that can then be imported into Google Earth, so you can do exactly what I'm doing here for my chart. You'll be able to do that and much more, as you'll see in future chapters of this series. So I wish you a fine day and have fun playing around with Google Earth. Bye now.